So today we're going to be looking at Sheikh-ul-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah's brief biography. Imam Ibn Taymiyyah's full name is Taqi-ud-Din Ahmad bin Abdul Halim. He was born in Haran on 22nd January 1263 AD, or in the Hijri calendar that's 10th of Rabi al-Awwal 661. His family had been renowned for its learning. His father Abdul Halim, his uncle Fakhr-ud-Din and grandfather Majd-ud-Din were great scholars of Hanbalite school of jurisprudence and the authors of many books. His family members were forced to leave their native place in 1269 AD before the approach of the Mongols and to take refuge in Damascus. At that time, Ibn Taymiyyah was 7 years old. His father Abdul Halim was appointed as professor and head of Sukariya Madrasa. Endowed with a penetrating intellect and a wonderful memory, Ibn Taymiyyah studied at an early stage all the disciplines of jurisprudences, the ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ, commentaries of the Quran, mathematics and philosophy, and in each he was far ahead of his contemporaries. Among his teachers were Shamsuddin al-Maqdisi, first Hanbali Chief Justice of Syria following the reform of the judiciary of Baybars. The number of Ibn Taymiyyah's teachers exceeds 200. Ibn Taymiyyah was barely 17 when Qadi al-Maqdisi authorized him to issue fatwa, legal verdicts. Qadi remembered with pride that it was he who had first permitted an intelligent and learned man like Ibn Taymiyyah to give fatwa. At the same age, he started delivering lectures. When he was 30, he was offered the office of Chief Justice, but refused as he could not persuade himself to follow the limitations imposed by the authorities. Imam Ibn Taymiyyah's education was essentially that of a Hanbali theologian and jurisconsult. But to his knowledge of early and classical Hanbalism, he added not only that of the other schools of jurisprudence, but also that of heresiographical literature, in particular of philosophy and Sufism. He had an extensive knowledge of Quran, Sunnah, Greek philosophy, Islamic history, and religious books of others, as is evident from the variety of books he wrote. Though he preferred the Hanbali school of jurisprudence, he was never biased in favor of it. In his writings, he frequently quoted the opinions of all four of the well-known schools of jurisprudence and even others. In a number of matters, he himself held opinions different from those of the four schools of thought. In fact, he was an original thinker, a mujtahid, who merely drew upon the wisdom of the four established schools. In all his reformative efforts, Ibn Taymiyyah accepted the Quran and the Sunnah being the traditions of the Prophet ﷺ, as the basic criteria. In matters where there was no clear guidance from the Quran and the Sunnah, he never hesitated to venture into rational thought and took the path of ijtihad to create originality and initiative. The 13th and 14th centuries AD have a distinguished place in Islamic history. Ibn al-Athir described the political and military conditions prevailing in the Muslim world during Ibn Taymiyyah's lifetime in the following words. Islam and Muslims had during that period been afflicted by such disasters that no other nation had experienced. One such affliction was the invasion by Tatar. They came from the east and inflicted overwhelming damages. Another was the onset of the Frankish people, i.e. the Crusaders, from the west to Mesopotamia and Egypt. They occupied the ports and nearly subjected all of Egypt to their rule, had it not been from Allah's mercy and victory over them. But another affliction was that the Muslims themselves had become divided, and their swords lifted up against their fellows. In addition to such horrid conditions facing the Muslims on the political and military front, Islam as practiced and preached by the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ as al-Salaf al-Salihin, i.e. the righteous predecessors, was being seriously challenged by various deviant sects. The Sufi movement, which was spearheaded by the teachings of al-Ghazali, had won over many converts and was exercising a firm hold on the intellect and patterns of thought of many people. Along with this, al-Ash'ari system of creed had been widely accepted by the majority of the scholars of Ibn Taymiyyah's day. Al-Ash'ari system of doctrine was a mixture of Salafi methodology, which is based on revelation-centered theology, and the Mu'tazila methodology, which is based on the rationalist thought system. Taqleed was practiced widely, even though information on the deen, fiqh, ahadith were abundantly available. Only a handful of scholars and ordinary people took up the task of investigating the sources of the knowledge and its vehicle. Most people blindly accepted the teaching of their sheikh or imam without questioning or investigating the sources from where the knowledge had come. Imam Ibn Taymiyyah's struggles and persecutions. Ibn Taymiyyah's life was not confined to the world of books and words. Whenever circumstances demanded, he took part in political and public affairs too, distinguishing himself not only through these writings and speeches of his, but also with the sword as a brave warrior. Participation in jihad. In 1300, the Mongols under the king Ghazan invaded Syria and defeated the Sultan's army. Ibn Taymiyyah, by this time well known, flung himself into the stream of affairs. While the religious divines and saints were leaving Damascus to take refuge in Egypt, the Mongol threat arose for a second time. Ibn Taymiyyah exhorted people to jihad and encouraged them to confront the Mongols boldly. He toured the cities, called the people to a holy war, and fired them with zeal. After a pitched battle at Shakhab, in which Ibn Taymiyyah fought bravely, the Syrian-Egyptian army won a glorious victory that turned the tide against the Mongols. This victory, which was to a great extent due to Ibn Taymiyyah's efforts and commitment, stopped the Mongols' advance. Apart from the Battle of Shakhab, he took part in many other expeditions with the Mamluk authorities, and also undertook a few expeditions without them. Opposition of rival ulama. Because of his brilliant performance on the battlefield and his radical thinking, Ibn Taymiyyah's fame spread throughout the realm, and he became a highly distinguished celebrity. This made a number of jurists jealous. Ibn Kathir has pointed out this fact, saying that a group of jurisprudents were jealous of Ibn Taymiyyah, as the people paid heed to him. To enjoin good and to forbid evil was his vocation, and because of this he became very popular among the people. His followers were countless. His religious zeal, learning, and actions made them jealous of him. For the complaint of rival ulama, he was imprisoned several times. His last imprisonment began on 13th July 1326 and lasted until his death. His opponents dug up an old fatwa related to tomb visits given by him some 17 years ago, which could be provocatively interpreted. In his treatise on the subject, Risala Ziyara al-Qubur, Ibn Taymiyyah had questioned the legality of visiting tombs, even the tomb of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. His opponents distorted the sense and context of this fatwa to make it objectionable in the eyes of the public and the Sultan of that time. A great dispute arose, and Ibn Taymiyyah was imprisoned in the citadel of Damascus, along with some of his pupils, included Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawzi. While in prison, Ibn Taymiyyah spent all his time teaching and writing. Many of his works were produced in this period. In 1328, he was deprived of all means of writing. His pen and papers were taken away. But this did not stop him from writing. He wrote many letters and booklets with coal. He never complained to anybody about his persecution. Only when all reading and writing materials were taken away from him did he say, "Now they really have put me into prison." He breathed his last breath on 26th of September 1328, which is 20th of Dhul Qa'dah 728 Hijri, after having endured harsh conditions for 5 months. The whole country mourned. Schools, shops, hotels and markets were closed to mark his death. His burial was attended by the great numbers of Damascans. Eyewitnesses confirmed that, excepting some invalids, All turned out for his funeral, both those who had been for him and even those against him. This is a clear testimony of his place among the people, of their appreciation of his sacrifices for public purposes and just cause. Including the 2 years and 3 months of his last imprisonment, Ibn Taymiyyah spent about 5 years of his life in different prisons. A great reformer. In the Islamic perspective, reform is understood quite differently than in Christian or Jewish terminology. In Islam, reform means purification of the original Islamic teachings and the removal of un-Islamic new practices known as bid'at and misconceptions. In this sense of the word, and in this world, Ibn Taymiyyah was a great reformer. The main aspects of his reforms. The most important element of Ibn Taymiyyah's reforms were A. To bring about a revolution against un-Islamic practices, bid'at, that had crept into Islam, and to emphasize the concept of Tawheed with all its implications. B. A return to the fundamental priorities of Islam and its original spirit, instead of disputing over secondary and non-fundamental problems. Another target of Ibn Taymiyyah's criticism was Greek philosophy and logic. He knew that unless the crippling falsehood of Greek philosophy was removed, the people will not be able to grasp the divine truth of Islam. He studied critically all the great Muslim philosophers and their works in this regard, and then he opposed them extremely. Rejection of Sufism and deniers of Sifat. He abhorred the Sufi ideas of pantheism, Gnosticism, and deterministic view of total religious resignation. According to him, the implication of these ideas upon the Muslim community were devastating because they led to political apathy, religious misconceptions, and withdrawal from an active community life. A major portion of his intellectual energies was spent refuting the doctrine of the Sufis. The Shia were also subjected to harsh criticism by Ibn Taymiyyah because of the many flaws in their doctrines and beliefs. He strongly denounced their falsification of the historical facts and forging of the Sunnah to support their own political views. Ibn Taymiyyah also attacked Al-Jahmiyyah and Al-Jabariyah, the determinists who deny the human being's responsibility for any of his actions. He also denounced Al-Mu'tazila and Al-Qadariyah, the rationalists, who held human free will as the basis of human action. He also did doctrinal battle with the followers of the Abdul Hasan al-Ash'ari on various issues including determinism, free will, the names and attributes of Allah Azza wa Jal, and other issues of the Islamic creed. As a result of his confrontation with the Sufis and the scholasticists, he made many enemies among them. Many of their leaders who exercised political clout used it against him, and as a result he was once exiled in Alexandria and imprisoned on 3 different occasions. Ibn Taymiyyah gave himself relentlessly to pointing the way to the knowledge, which in his own words means the Prophet ﷺ has shown the fundamentals and applications of religion, its intent as well as its expression, its intellectual knowledge, and its action. This fact is the foundation of all fundamental knowledge and belief, and he who most adheres to this foundation is most worthy of the truth, both to know it and to do it. His method of teaching. Ibn Taymiyyah's method of teaching was both elegant and striking, replete with authentic references, strengthened with rational arguments and evidence from the ahadith. For a lecture on any subject, he would refer to verses of the Quran and discuss their meanings with cross-references from the Quran. He would also note evidence from ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ and check their authenticity. He would then expound the relevant opinions of the 4 schools of jurisprudence and of other famous experts in jurisprudence. Having discussed the matter fully in this way, the problem and its solution would become clear in the minds of his listeners. Ibn Taymiyyah had prodigiously good memory, which helped him overwhelm his adversaries in polemic. Impact of Ibn Taymiyyah through the ages. Ibn Taymiyyah created a climate of revolutionary thinking both through his ideas and his reformist endeavors, whose impact was felt not only in his own time but ever since. In his lifetime, people were divided either into those who were strong opponents or strong supporters, fully in agreement with him, or uncommitted, those who agreed with some views and disagreed with others of his. Ibn Taymiyyah left behind a large number of books and disciplines. His opponents soon sank into anonymity, while the value of an appreciation for his works has increased. In his own lifetime, Ibn Taymiyyah's fame and influence extended beyond the boundaries of Egypt and Syria. When he was imprisoned for the last time in the citadel of Damascus, many letters came from the inhabitants of Baghdad protesting against his arrest and demanding his release. When he died, funeral prayers in absentia were performed even as far as China.